Hi, if you're a normal person who wants to reclaim your digital privacy, then this video is for you. If instead you're somebody whose actual well-being depends on anonymity in a very real way, you should take a look at these projects and preferably put your phone and any incriminating hard drives through a good quality blender. You're probably already aware that companies and governments are gathering extensive portfolios on you from everything you do with your computer and using it in all kinds of nasty ways. In this video, I'll give you a very accessible explanation of where you need to be protecting your data in order to reclaim your privacy, and then the clear, actionable steps you should take in order to actually do that, all in one place. I'll focus mostly on computers here, but the ideas apply just as well to phones later down the line, so I'll include some mobile examples as a teaser. You don't need to be a tech expert, you don't need to make big sacrifices on quality or usability, and you don't need to do it all at once. I've laid it out so that the easy stuff comes first, and the stuff that would have been hard later becomes easy because of it. The idea is that you'll make some changes, come back to the video, and then make some more as you have time. It'll gradually reclaim your privacy, and as a bonus, you'll get better security and digital freedom too, since these three are all very closely linked. Now, in order to patch the data leaks, you need to know where they are. So I've divided an average person's digital life into the chunks where their information could be stolen. I know that looks like a lot, but these 5 concepts are all the technical knowledge you'll need, and we'll take them on one by one and learn as we go. The key to privacy is switching each of these things to a trustworthy replacement, because the sad fact of the matter is that we can only ensure control of our computer and data if we switch away from using disreputable services at all. Privacy settings are worth setting, but it's unfortunately not enough to just mark some preferences that could be ignored. If the thief has your key, you can't just pin a note to the door. You need to change the lock. I know it can be a lot of work to figure out what is trustworthy and what isn't, and the sheer number of options can be overwhelming. So as we go through these categories, I'll give you my personal suggestions on what to use that is both of quality and which will respect your privacy. There are other good options, but here's somewhere to start. All of the suggestions will be open source, which means they have public code so that the community can see exactly what they do and how. And all will be free except for the VPN service, but that comes later anyway. Note that I'm not sponsored in any way by any of these projects. This is just the best advice I myself am able to give you as a privacy-minded developer who's been digging down this rabbit hole for several years. I'll leave a link to each suggestion in the description, where you can download the applications I'm suggesting from their official websites. If you aren't sure how to download and install applications, you can check the corresponding videos in the description or on the webpage that I made for this video. We'll work basically from the top of this pile down. That will make it easy to switch out each coming layer because we'll have already chosen the right things to put on top of it. Great, let's get switching. Browser. The first thing I recommend you change is actually your browser. This is the app that you open when you want to browse the internet, and you probably know it as Chrome, Safari, Edge, or Firefox. The browser you use has a huge amount of power over your digital life. It sees everything you do as you're looking around online, every single mouse movement, keystroke, link, and click. It can either protect you from the websites you visit or collaborate with them to violate your trust. First, a word about usage. A lot of people leave many tabs open and rarely close their browsers. This is problematic for privacy, security, and I would even argue productivity. Apart from being hard to find things in the giant mess of tabs, by accumulating such a pile, you give all those websites the chance to communicate in the background through third-party tracking services provided by Google and Facebook, among others. And the longer they're open, the longer they can do their thing. Instead, you should bookmark tabs you don't want to lose, saving them in folders at the top bar, and close and clear the data often. My browser recommendation makes that easy. I would say Mullvad browser should be your default for everything. It does a great deal to protect you from trackers, and it can later be combined with their VPN to mask your location. As a tiny tip of the iceberg example, it blocks off many ways websites use to communicate in the background, and it clears your data automatically every time you close it or push this button. Mullvad has an excellent track record when it comes to data protection. Despite all that, note that your ISP will always be able to see which websites your computer is communicating with, unless you're also using Tor or VPN. Don't worry, we'll talk about that later. For now, this is already an easy way to improve the situation by removing websites' access to a lot of their spy toolbox. When switching to Mullvad, you may notice some websites stop working. This is actually a testament to Mullvad's success because the website is actively blocking people it can't steal data from. In this case, you should check a less scummy website if possible, which becomes a consequence for the first one that then loses a visit. For the case of online banking or for other websites which require a more delicate touch, I would also install and keep Brave around, but only use this in private mode and not the Tor version with banks. If you do want to use Tor for anonymous browsing, use the Tor browser itself and separately from a VPN. We'll talk about that later. On mobile, you should use Brave unless Vanadium is available on your phone, in which case use that. Accounts. Accounts then. This is when you log into something online, like Gmail or social media. Generally, you should avoid logging in whenever possible, since doing so tells whatever service you're using exactly who you are. Never use the options to link your accounts together, like logging into a new service with your Google account, for example. That makes it trivial for the companies to link together your activity on different sites, and represents a security threat of having everything protected by one account. Instead, make a new account for every new account you want. Seems reasonable, right? Even if you do this, however, companies will still link up your activity in the background by using other identifiers like your email and phone number, as well as whatever data they can scrape from your internet connection or browser. For the services you've already linked together through a shared login like Google, your options for each service are 1. Keep using the account, realizing that it is linked with all others through the shared login. 2. Make a new account, as I'll describe in a moment, and transfer important data to the new account. Delete the old account if possible. You should never give out your phone number for account creation if at all possible, and privacy-respecting services will rarely require it. An exception to this is that if a service involves payment, they will probably require a phone number for billing purposes. Unfortunately, anonymous internet payments aren't really practical or accessible for most people anyway, so just be aware that when you do give out your number, companies can easily link up your activity associated with it. So do this sparingly. As far as payments go, it's a good idea, at least from a security standpoint, to use different disposable virtual cards for each service, if your bank provides that option. Another important mitigation technique for this kind of account correlation is to use DuckDuckGo's email service. This lets you generate a different random email to use for each account, and they'll send the mail they receive to the email address you actually use after removing trackers. Using a different email for each account makes it harder for them to be linked together, which is good for security as well as privacy. Other information you give to the site, however, could still be used to identify you, and all of your activity within a given account will still, of course, be linked together under that account's random email. DuckDuckGo doesn't collect or store your data. To set up DuckDuckGo's email service and to generate new random emails with it, you need to use either their browser extension or app. These are both open source. I find it convenient to install their browser app on my phone and use it exclusively as an email generator by keeping the tab open while using Vanadium as my actual browser. Do note that email is inherently flawed and should not be considered private or secure. If you want to communicate sensitive information to somebody, you should use Signal instead. But even Signal is only as safe as the operating system allows it to be. More on that later. That said, I do recommend you switch to Proton Mail for the platform where you receive and read your mail, which will offer a meaningful improvement to your privacy over the webmail that most people use. They offer a good free tier, strip some more trackers from your emails, and are very user-friendly. Unlike Google, Outlook, and Yahoo, they don't track or monetarily exploit the contents of your emails. They also have a suite of other web services that may interest you to replace Google services. That includes collaborative document editing and storage. If you've already set up DuckDuckGo to generate random duck emails, you can now change their forwarding address to your Proton account. This means you will generate and give out a random duck email to each thing you sign up for, and then you'll read the mail that you get in your Proton inbox. This means you can also deactivate a specific account's email later if you're getting spammed, or you can move trivially to a different webmail platform if you decide you don't like Proton. To avoid losing track of email that is still being sent to your old account, you can set up a forwarding rule in Gmail or Outlook to route mail to a new random duck email. Now all the mail that you get to your old address will be sent on to your Proton Mail account with trackers removed. At this point you can continue, but whenever you now get an email from your old address, go to the service that sent it and switch it to use a new random duck email, to avoid Google seeing all of your mail as a man in the middle. With many emails and passwords, you'll need a reasonable way to keep track of them. This can be accomplished with a password manager like KeePassXC, which I have more information about on the website for this video. For AI queries, use duck.ai. You can choose from a bunch of models, and your requests will be anonymized by sending them through DuckDuckGo. No need to sign up with personal details, and your conversations won't be used for training. For YouTube viewing, you should use FreeTube. It will allow you to watch YouTube videos fairly privately, especially if you couple it with a VPN later. All of your history and subscriptions are kept on your own computer, instead of being tracked by Google. Another option is to watch YouTube through Mullvad without logging in and restart the browser before and after each session. That doesn't involve installing anything, so it's easy, but you don't get a history or subscriptions because all of that is cleared whenever you close Mullvad. For a map of the world, you can use OpenStreetMaps instead of Google Maps. I don't personally use social media except for messengers, because doing so is intrinsically not private. That said, Mastodon is a good replacement to Twitter, and for messaging or video calls, I recommend Signal. I do have a Facebook Marketplace account using a random duck email, but have only logged in there when there's something I specifically want to buy. The same goes for Amazon and eBay. In general, I would advise limiting social media use for more reasons than just privacy, but the less you use the platform, the less information you give them. That said, if you do publish personal photos or stories on social media, go through the privacy settings of the service in question to limit how that information is spread. Don't expect this to stop the all-prevalent automated analysis and profiling of who you are as a person, but it can at least make it harder for private or corporate stalkers to nose their way into your life. Programs. Programs are the apps you have installed. They're the different tools you have for getting work done and interacting with files. Your browser is also a program. So are games. Depending on what you do with your computer, there are lots of programs you might want to use. So instead of going through all of my recommendations in detail, I put together this table. You can look at it on the website that's associated with this video. It has the category of programs, an example of a popular closed source option, and my suggested open source replacement. I also have some suggestions for mobile apps, where applicable. I also have links on that page to other videos that provide details for installing apps on your particular operating system. When downloading a program you want to install, you may have to choose from a couple different versions. These different versions correspond to different combinations of what are called operating systems and CPU architectures, which are important for whether or not the program will work. You probably know whether you're running Windows or Mac OS, and that's the operating system part. But you might not know what CPU architecture you have. Chances are it's 64-bit, which is called Intel on Macs, but you can check in your computer's settings menu, and I'll link a video for Windows and Mac that shows you where to look. Using the wrong installer won't work properly, so if you get stuck, just try the 64-bit or Intel version and see if you guessed right. If the program installs and works properly, then it was the right installer. The key when it comes to choosing programs is to use established open source ones. If you remember from earlier, that means anybody can look to make sure the app is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. To check if a project is established or not, you can look it up on GitHub, which is a platform where people collaborate on open source projects. If the project has around 1,000 stars or more, it's quite well established, but it never hurts to check other reviews or forum discussions if you want to. Happily enough, these programs are almost always free, although donations are appreciated. The open way of working basically removes all options for unscrupulous behavior or money grabbing. If someone suggests a bad change, it will be rejected. If the main team starts ruining the project, we can copy it and not do that. The only motivation is to build a good project together that does the stuff we need done well. That's the motivation behind these choices. Links in the description. Note that you may need to be open to learning new things here, since the workflow might differ between programs. But in the end, it will be worth it because you'll have the peace of mind of knowing that you can trust your tools, you can have a say in how they're developed in the future, and you'll never have to pay another scummy software subscription again. How's that for incentive, huh? When switching programs, you don't necessarily have to migrate all of your old projects to the new programs all at once. That could be tricky since the project files from one program might not load in a different one. Instead, you should keep both programs installed while you transition, and try to start just the new projects in the new program. That way you'll eventually have all of your active projects in the new program with minimal frustration. Remember, each change helps, and you can do this step by step. It will be easier to start with the tools you use the least, and then transition gradually with the ones you use daily. Games are a particularly problematic type of program, because they are nearly all closed source. That means we can't know what they're actually doing, which makes them inherently untrustable. This is then made abundantly clear if you ever read a game's privacy policy. They do exactly the things we expect these days from all other disreputable companies. The best thing to do about this would be to have a separate computer used only for gaming. For those of us that don't have that option, we can get comparable protection by dual booting. I'll explain this more in the section on operating systems a little later. For now, I recommend avoiding games with low-level anti-cheat software and games which require services that run in the background even when the game isn't active. Both of those things add cumbersome extra work for your computer, potentially slowing things down and introducing bugs, and they give malware more options to infect your system. Many anti-cheat programs also reduce personal freedom by explicit design or by necessity when it comes to software or operating system choice. If you're not sure about a game, you can check this list from Level or also areweanticheatyet.com. What that site tells you is actually not how invasive the anti-cheat software is, but instead which games with anti-cheat software run on the Linux operating systems. If you don't know what an operating system is, don't worry, we'll get to that in a minute. Just know that this is important for 3 reasons. 1, the endgame of this video is switching to Linux for its privacy, performance, freedom, and quality of life benefits. 2, support for Linux demonstrates a certain level of respect for the customer's preferences that some games notably lack. And 3, if the anti-cheat runs on Linux, it probably doesn't integrate itself as deeply into your system, which is good. When a game says denied on that site, that means the company in charge made an explicit decision to block Linux users. My personal opinion is that if a game doesn't respect my choices when it comes to how I want to set my computer up, then I'll play something else. Operating system. The operating system is like the virtual environment that your programs live in. You probably recognize the operating systems Android, macOS, and Windows, but there are others, like Linux. These systems give apps a way of interacting with things like your screen and hard drive, and they give you ways of interacting with the programs by using things like your mouse and keyboard. Much like your browser's relationship to what you do online, your operating system has complete control over and knowledge of everything you do with programs in it. That's a huge amount of power, so it's incredibly important that we can trust our operating system. Unfortunately, most people can't. The overwhelming majority of people use Windows or other closed-source operating systems, and Windows is notoriously awful when it comes to respecting the privacy and freedom of its users. macOS may be marginally better, but still suffers from the same problems of unknown code combined with monetary incentives to abuse user privacy. That's why the crux of this video is switching to Linux. Linux is open source and community-driven, so we know it's trustworthy. Because it lacks all of the tracking software and anti-features that Windows and macOS have, Linux also often gives you better performance and longer battery life, while using less RAM and powering on much faster. Linux tends to have much better support for older computers than Windows, so if you're stuck unable to upgrade to the next Windows version, you should absolutely switch now for free instead of buying a new computer for the latest deep-level spying. And the fact that Linux is community-built guarantees that it will never take advantage of its users. There's no company to benefit from that, and the users are the developers. There are lots of varieties of Linux, called distributions, which can be confusing for newcomers. Basically all of them are good, but to make it simple for you, I suggest you use the distribution called Zorin OS, which I'll link to below. You can try it to make sure everything works before installing it. You can choose from familiar desktop layouts to make the transition more intuitive, and it includes some nice compatibility tools that I think many new users would appreciate. Zorin is based on Ubuntu, which itself is based on Debian. Those are very popular, well-known systems for which it's easy to find help or tutorials online. If you get stuck, just look for how to XYZ Zorin or how to XYZ Ubuntu, and you'll soon find your solution. In my sources list, you can find a video where a fresh Zorin OS installation is tested to see that it doesn't upload your data. While looking through the settings and privacy policy for Zorin, I did notice this option, which I would turn off, and you can turn it off in the installer directly, but I wouldn't say it represents any meaningful privacy concern. When switching to Linux, one of the things that trips people up is indeed compatibility issues, meaning things you expect to work don't. Linux actually has astonishingly good compatibility for programs that aren't designed to run on it, thanks to impressive community ingenuity and a boost from Valve. But if you've already taken my previous steps, you shouldn't have trouble here at all, because all of that advice shifts your workflow and program choices to be entirely Linux friendly. On Zorin, for example, you can install every one of my previous program recommendations directly from the Software Center like this. The only exception here is the certain games you might still want to play that block Linux. So here's a chart for how to set things up based on your needs. Where the table recommends 2 operating systems, this is referred to what's called dual booting, and that's when you have 2 different operating systems installed simultaneously on your machine, and you can switch between them by restarting. Linux has good support for doing this kind of thing. so these options are quite easy to set up. Windows, on the other hand, especially Windows 11, will actively seek out and murder any other operating systems it finds itself to share a computer with. So dual booting Windows and Linux is unfortunately only an option for those of you who really know what you're doing. If you absolutely can't sacrifice the few games that aren't compatible, you should instead get a cheap second-hand computer for work and put Zorin on that instead. That's also a good option if you're unsure about the Switch and want to try Linux for a while before committing. I found people selling reasonable laptops for under €100 locally, probably because of Windows' lack of support. And you may already have an old laptop that you could easily test Linux on, or maybe a friend has one. In the context of privacy, using a separate computer or dual booting lets you isolate the untrustworthy Windows or game environment from your work environment. The dual booting strategy for protecting privacy is most effective when you encrypt the operating system you intend to use for work and use a different password for each system. This means that the system you don't trust can't read data stored on the work system. But by encrypting your work system, you make it harder to recover from hard drive or system failures, which is why I don't recommend it by default unless you're comfortable handling regular backups of your data. Using regular backups is something you can absolutely learn to do, and you should really be doing anyway, especially since Zorin includes a nice program for it right out of the box. But that's a topic for another video. Unless you opt to put Zorin on a separate computer, you will need to back up your important files once before making operating system changes. What that means is that you need to know where your important files are and copy them onto an external hard drive. This is because when we install a new operating system, all data on the computer will be erased. So you need to move the data you care about off the computer first. If you've been working on projects or downloading files, you probably know where those are. But it can be less clear where to find game-saved data or other program-specific files like settings, because those files are automatically generated. There are some standard locations you can look first, but in the end, where they're stored depends on the program and the operating system. So if you're having trouble finding a certain set of files, you should look up that program on your operating system specifically. If you have important files that were produced by Windows or Mac-specific tools, you should make sure you can open those with one of my recommended programs, or else convert them to a Linux-friendly format to ensure you maintain access to those files after the switch. If you have an encrypted external hard drive, which was encrypted with Windows or Mac-specific tools, then you should look up whether that drive can be accessed on Linux. If not, you'll need to use the tool which originally encrypted the drive to decrypt or copy the contents to an unencrypted location before switching operating systems, and then use VeraCrypt to re-encrypt the drive instead. I intend to upload videos covering each of these scenarios explicitly in the future, but for now I'll just refer you to the extensive and straightforward documentation on Zorin's own site, along with many other YouTube videos covering how to install Linux. For mobile, Graphene OS is really the only option I'm aware of for privacy and security. You can learn more about it on site of Burrito's channel or on the official website. Links below. Network connection. When I say network connection here, I'm talking about the way your computer itself accesses the internet. An example would be a VPN. That's a bit different from a browser or other programs we've talked about, because the network connection is part of that underlying environment that all of your programs live in. It's like an invisible pipe that connects your computer to the internet, and if any of your programs, like your browser, want to access something on the internet, then they'll have to go through that pipe. If you're using the internet, say to look at a website, what's happening is that there's information being exchanged between you and that website. That has to happen somehow, and you're paying a company to make it happen. The company is called an ISP, for Internet Service Provider. And you can think of them as a post office of the internet, except a lot less reputable. They might read your letters if you use HTTP envelopes, and they'll keep a history of all the website people you've ever corresponded with. By using this system as is, you're also leaving a return address on every bit of internet communication your computer makes, letting websites and other services know who sent the letter. Your options to avoid this are Mullvad VPN or Tor, and I would recommend Mullvad VPN. Before you consider installing either of these tools, though, I should mention that in certain countries like China, Russia, Turkey, Iran, North Korea, the UAE, or Saudi Arabia, use of a VPN, or especially Tor, may be subject to censorship or even legal consequences. In most countries it's totally fine, but please check before you go further. I suggest specifically Mullvad because it does a better job of keeping your ISP from knowing who you communicate with, and has a much better track record than other VPN providers when it comes to privacy. Milvad VPN costs a flat rate of €5 per month, the same as it cost at its birth in 2009, and you can pay tracelessly in cash if you want. Tor does an even better job than Milvad, and it's free, but it's much more likely to cause errors on websites, once again because the sites are blocking people they can't track. If you do need a truly anonymous browsing session for whatever reason, Tor with the Tor browser is the way to go. But in that case, you should look at these resources before proceeding, because anonymity is fragile even with the best tools available, and it relies on how you use those tools. On mobile, you can again use Milvad VPN for your device in general, although I've also had a pretty good experience using Vanadium over Tor with the Orbot app. If you're running Graphene OS, consider setting up another profile which uses Orbot, and see if the website blocking trade-off is worth it to you. I'll link to a video on how to set that up. With this section done, you've made meaningful and sustainable improvements to your privacy on all fronts. Congratulations. If you have opinions, questions, or updates regarding this video, please write them in the comments. If you found this video useful, please share it with someone you think could benefit from it. The more we all put a little effort into showing that we value privacy, the more that voice will be heard and supported, improving the situation for everybody. Have a nice day, and thanks for watching.